In the sweep of 19th-century Atlantic history, one life can reveal the pressures and possibilities of an entire era. Born into bondage on Maryland's eastern shore, Araminta Minty Ross, who would become known to history as Harriet Tubman, lived at the center of a world shaped by plantation economies, racial law, and the movements that opposed them. Her story unfolds between roughly 1822 and 1913, and it intersects with pivotal moments: the codification of fugitive laws, the intensifying debates over slavery in the 1840s and 1850s, and the convulsions of the American Civil War from 1861 to 1865. Key actors in this story include enslaved families and communities in Dorchester County, Maryland, abolitionist networks in the North, the clandestine routes and safe houses later called the Underground Railroad, and, during the war years, Union military commanders who employed African American scouts and guides. Important legal markers appear along the way: the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850, which increased risks for escapees and those who assisted them, and military operations such as the Combahee River Raid of June 2nd in 1863, in which Harriet played a consequential role. Against this backdrop, Tubman's life offers both a personal narrative of survival and a wider illustration of resistance, adaptation, and leadership in a time of acute moral and political crisis. To understand Harriet Tubman's actions, one must first consider the structures that constrained and defined them. Dorchester County, on Maryland's eastern shore, was an agricultural region in which enslaved labor sustained households and fields. Laws and customs treated men, women, and children as property. Movement, association, and education were restricted by local practice and by state statutes. At the same time, African-descended people created dense networks of mutual support, extended kinship, religious practice, and covert communication that would become the foundation for organized escape and rescue. Harriet was born Araminta Ross, the daughter of Harriet Ritt Green and Ben Ross. Her birth is usually dated circa 1822. As a child, she performed heavy labor, both in fields and as a domestic servant, and in early adolescence, she suffered a severe head injury when an overseer struck a fleeing enslaved man with a weighted object. The blow struck young Harriet instead. The injury produced chronic pain, seizures, and episodes she later described as visions or spiritual impressions. These experiences shaped her later life, informing her religious resolve and her sense of mission. By the 1840s, the national tension over slavery was deepening. Fugitive slaves often fled northward, and a network of abolitionists, free black communities, and sympathetic whites, what would be called the Underground Railroad, began to coordinate more systematically. Harriet married John Tubman, a free black man, in 1844, taking his surname. In 1849, fearing sale and permanent separation from family, she escaped bondage herself and found refuge in Philadelphia. The enactment of the Fugitive Slave Act in 1850 made northern sanctuary precarious, and it hardened the risks for returning conductors. Nevertheless, in the 1850s, Harriet repeatedly chose to return south, guiding relatives and others to freedom by means of secrecy, local knowledge, and careful planning. Harriet Tubman's adult life can be read as a sequence of deliberate, often hazardous returns to the very territory that had once held her captive. After reaching Philadelphia in 1849, she did not regard freedom as a private condition. Instead, she set a course to reclaim family and community members who remained enslaved. Over the course of the 1850s, she is documented to have undertaken multiple missions, traditionally counted as about 13, in which she led people north to safety. The commonly cited figure of roughly 70 freed persons originates in contemporary accounts and in later recollections. Historians emphasize, however, that these numbers are best viewed as approximate rather than definitive. Each mission required careful intelligence and discipline. Tubman moved mostly by night, following visible and invisible guides: the arc of the Big Dipper and the North Star, the patterns of rivers and fences, the signals of allies and sympathetic households. She relied on coded language, trusted stops, private homes, churches and barns, and on the unwillingness of many white neighbors to spotlight covert movements. Success depended on small decisions: when to wait in a hollow, when to cross a river, when to split a group. The Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 imposed a new legal hazard. Even in free states, alleged fugitives could be seized and returned. Tubman adapted. She pressed greater secrecy into her plans, encouraging those escaping to travel in smaller groups and in winter months to hide in plain sight. Her reputation grew. Free black communities in places like Rochester, New York, provided logistical support. Abolitionist allies offered shelter and occasionally funds. Word spread that this woman would not leave a person behind. Her moral clarity became a tactical advantage. Her returns were not simple flights, but organized operations. She coordinated timing, identified safe houses, and placed people under the care of known allies until they could move further north or cross into Canada. With the outbreak of the Civil War in 1861, Tubman's role shifted in scope. She relocated to the Union base in South Carolina and to operations along the southern coast. She served as a nurse for black soldiers and as a scout and spy for Union forces. In June 1863, she worked closely with Union Colonel James Montgomery in the Combahee River Raid, a riverine expedition along the South Carolina coast. Tubman had cultivated intelligence among enslaved people in the coastal plantations and provided information on river channels, plantation layouts, and the disposition of Confederate forces. The raid freed more than 700 enslaved people from several plantations, an operation in which Tubman's JORIS knowledge and leadership were acknowledged by military planners. After the war, Tubman continued to act on behalf of her community. She settled in Auburn, New York, where she had family connections, cared for elderly relatives, and became involved in Republican politics and in the early suffrage movement. Though she often found the priorities of women, rights leaders, and those of black communities to be unevenly aligned. She married Benjamin John Tubman in 1844, and later in 1869 married Nelson Davis, a formerly enslaved soldier who had served with the Union. Financial hardships followed the war. Tubman petitioned for a military pension and for support for her home for aged African Americans, work that occupied her in the later decades of life. Throughout these decades, Tubman's image was both concrete and symbolic. To those she guided, she was a pragmatic leader whose strategies combined local knowledge, stealth, and an unshakable moral conviction. To abolitionist writers and later popular memory, she became a figure of near-mythic resolve, Moses, a deliverer who walked back into danger again and again. Yet her actual methods were practical, grounded in observation and in networks of human trust. Her spiritual life, shaped in part by the epileptiform episodes that followed her childhood injury, was a source of resolve and of intuitive judgment, not a theatrical performance. In quiet, focused ways, she combined moral authority, tactical sense, and a willingness to take responsibility for others. Harriet Tubman's life invites several analytical observations. First, her leadership demonstrates how moral courage and operational skill can coexist. She was not merely impulsive. Her returns to the South display methodical planning, risk assessment, and the cultivation of allies across racial and geographic lines. Second, her spirituality, episodes she described as prophetic or visionary, must be read as a motivating framework that supplied both courage and interpretive certainty in ambiguous situations. Scholars caution, however, against reducing her strategy to mysticism alone. Tubman's success depended equally on tangible resources and on social networks. Third, the institutional context shaped both the possibility and the danger of rescue. The Fugitive Slave Act and tightened patrols made escapes more fraught after 1850. Yet the same political pressure intensified abolitionist activity and the resolve of conductors like Tubman. Fourth, her wartime service complicates easy categorizations of civilian and military roles. As a scout, spy, nurse, and recruiter, she moved between civic activism and organized military effort, illustrating how African American agency became central to Union strategy in the coastal South. Finally, historians discuss the balance between Tubman's real achievements and the later myth-making that expanded her deeds in popular memory. The two processes are not opposed. Myth can amplify moral truth, even as careful scholarship seeks to anchor claims in documentation. Understanding both helps preserve Tubman's humanity. Her concrete decisions, her networks, and the costs she bore. The immediate consequences of Tubman's work were both personal and political. On the personal level, dozens of individuals gained freedom and the opportunity to build new lives in northern states or in Canada. Each successful mission altered the life trajectory of families, severing the immediate possibility of sale and separation. On a broader scale, Tubman-ES activities contributed to a culture of organized resistance that pressured the institution of slavery at multiple points: moral, economic, and operational. During the Civil War, the intelligence she gathered and the recruits she helped bring into Union lines materially supported military operations and the broader strategy of undermining Confederate labor supplies. The Combahee River Raid stands as a vivid instance where civilian knowledge, rooted in lived acquaintance with the landscape and the people, translated directly into organized liberation on a larger scale. In the longer run, Tubman's life affected memory and politics. She became a symbol for subsequent generations of activists, women and men who drew on her example in campaigns for civil rights, for suffrage, and for racial justice. The post-war struggles over pensions, property, and public recognition also illustrate how emancipation did not automatically translate into social or economic security. Tubman's later efforts to care for aged African Americans and to secure a pension reveal the continuing work required to translate moral victories into stable social supports. As we pause on Harriet Tubman's life, its careful missions, wartime service, and quiet activism, our view widens. Her story does not end in a single life. It extends backward to the cultural and social formations of West Africa, and forward to the movements that claimed her as an exemplar. In the next segment, we will trace these transatlantic threads, the social structures and legal practices that shaped the Middle Passage, the survivals of African kinship and spiritual practice in the Americas, and the ways in which resistance traditions traveled across oceans. By moving now from the biography of one remarkable conductor to the broader currents that carried people and ideas across centuries, we begin to perceive how a 1,000-year arc of history lodged itself in single choices, single nights of travel, and single acts of courage.